So I've been thinking a lot about the Epstein files lately, as I'm sure many people have. And if I'm to understand it, nearly or roughly 3 million page dump from the DOJ. That may very well be our last kind of tranche of info that we get on this whole scandal. Uh, Apparently was both very revealing and left a whole lot more questions to be answered. And I think we're likely going to have to just settle in with the reality that a lot of us, myself included, already expected, that we're not going to get a lot of clear answers out of this, and it isn't magically going to all of a sudden lead to anyone being indicted or any billionaire actually being held accountable or anyone politically connected actually being impeached or held to account or anything like that. And it's gotten me thinking about how our system is overall and kind of how we got here and what this whole Epstein scandal really implies about America and the world today. So obviously the United States has been a world superpower at least since the end of World War II, and it's been the only world superpower since the early 1990s when the Soviet Union fell. And in that time, the United States really seems to have lost itself. Unfortunately, from my perspective, as one born in the late 80s, it's also, it's what I grew up through. We've squandered a kind of brilliant position that we've had. And instead of building up our infrastructure, building up our middle class, and skilling or upskilling American citizens, and making the workplace and the nation work better and more interesting and enticing for those with high skills to move over here from overseas, and making America competitive and prosperous and viable for the next century, that we've been so blessed to be leading the world into. We've almost ran away from any of those concepts. We've gone the other direction almost entirely. It is the last almost half century now has been a story of elites becoming more elite and more wealthy and translating that wealth into ever greater power, and the power that has been emerging is kind of sequestered and consolidated into the hands of fewer and fewer people. And you're really starting to see a pretty clear oligarchic tendency kind of just playing out in the open at this point. I think one of the most telling moments was like behind Donald Trump during his most recent inauguration in 2025. Sitting behind him were a bunch of billionaires, mostly like tech bro billionaires, or Bezos and Zuckerberg and Musk and so on, but you had others. And just the way that the Trump administration has seemingly kind of been bending the tech industry and the billionaires to his will really seems to be more show. It's more like they're buying him off, they're kissing the ring, and then a lot of these companies and these people are pretty much doing what they want. And the Epstein files really does seem to show that many of these wealthy, politically connected men in particular, they really do seem to have an expectation of operating with impunity, and even if something does go wrong, they have no expectation of being held to account. So they will do anything and whatever it takes to make sure they're not. Even as so far as I know, it's technically conspiratorial, but I personally doubt that Epstein was actually one who killed himself. The one who killed himself, right? I suspect that it was homicide, and that it was driven by a very intense and powerful desire of some very rich and powerful people to make sure he did not speak and didn't name names. And having him out of the way was kind of a necessary step to ensuring that didn't happen. So whether it's the Epstein scandal or Russia's invasion of Ukraine or China increasingly moving in on Taiwan or the United States even abducting Nicolas Maduro from Venezuela, like there are real problems and real concerning signs about where the world is going. And I think it really does demonstrate that in this neoliberal system that we've had in the United States and have been trying and working rather diligently on exporting to the rest of the world over the last half century or so, it really has necessarily led to a retreat of democracy and a reintroduction of tendencies that lead to authoritarianism and autocracy. And I used to think that these were separate issues, but it's really becoming clear now and increasingly obvious that these were always entwined, that neoliberalism was always going to result in greater concentration of wealth in the hands of elites, and those elites were going to do what they could in as many systems as possible throughout the world to translate that wealth into political power, and that political power would increasingly rest in the hands of more authoritarian-like strong leaders, and so you're getting Erdogan in Turkey, and Viktor Orban in Hungary, and Putin in Russia, and Xi Jinping in China, and Modi in India, and Trump in the United States, that are differing degrees, different levels. They're all in different places, and that's not to mention, like the Islamic regime in Iran, or the Un family in North Korea, or this House of Saud in Saudi Arabia. They're all very entrenched leaders that have been there and had almost absolute power for decades. That's a whole nother level. But that said, there's definitely seems to be a growth and a proliferation of authoritarianism in a lot of the world that seemed like it had moved past it. And it really does go to show that democracy and freedom requires vigilance, that we collectively need to stay on top of this. And one of the ways we do that is first waking up and realizing that our neoliberal system, our trickle-down economics, our laissez-faire capitalism, it is destroying us. And it's going to continue to, because it is built to not care about the rest of us. Unfortunately, whether we like it or not, the best way for democratic republics like ours here in the modern United States to function, to thrive, to prosper, is to embrace a more mixed economic model, or straight up things that we would generally consider socialism. But we've already been on that path, and it's already worked out pretty damn well for us. Like the whole entire New Deal era, kicked into gear by Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s and continuing until solidly through the presidency of Lyndon Johnson in the 60s, really was a time that many economists and historians call the golden age of capitalism. That, funnily enough, that helping the American people and redistributing wealth, or providing for the lowest, or those that struggled to find homes, or the elderly, or those that couldn't afford health insurance, and so on, really actually helped balance out the economy and balance out the nation, and led to a positive feedback loop that really allowed for us to develop the most prolific middle class and nation that the world had ever seen up until that time. And then since the late 70s, we've kind of gone out of our way, unbeknownst to many of us, to destroy it. And unfortunately, that's what we've been doing. We were fed a series of lies. And I think we're all pretty much awake, many of us anyway. We are very aware of that fact. But knowing which way to turn and how to rebuild our kind of collective bargaining power and our collective agreements and an understanding of what it is that we're going for, that's a long and tedious and arduous road. So while none of us know exactly how this is going to turn out, there are some pretty clear steps forward. Whether that be we need to start voting for more independent-minded politicians that are not acting as beholden to their respective parties and their billionaire donors. That may mean just voting for politicians that are in the Republican or Democratic Party that are willing to break with their party. Could mean voting third party. It may mean voting just independent candidates in general. That said, we need to start remaking our political system and understand that what we're voting for and what we're wanting. The Overton window of politics, which means what can be realistically achieved, is largely dictated by what the people put into place and what is expected. And increasingly, that's moved out of our control and into billionaires' control. As a Harvard study recently showed, like the bottom roughly 50% of Americans' opinion on a given issue has almost no impact on whether or not it passes. But those that are incredibly wealthy and that are big donors, their influence and their opinions do have a notable correlation between results and opinion. Wealthy definitely have a higher correlation between their opinions and the result of what ends up getting passed and implemented in the United States. So there are a few things we can start doing and supporting to begin to turn the tide in the favor of the working classes, notably here in the United States. And first off, I really believe that collective bargaining, so unions, employee associations, etc., neighborhood associations and social clubs and whatnot, like building community again, building worker power, building that collective bargaining leverage that American workers and American families have lost largely over the last number of decades and really could use again, needs to be built up. The reality is elites are not going to give us anything. The world doesn't give one anything. We take it, ultimately. And if we want the best result for us individually, we need to realize that we are the ants from A Bug's Life, and that we need to make sure that what is best for all of us is what's achieved, so that we may individually maximize our own liberty and prosperity and value and worth in society, because nobody else will give it to us. And make no mistake, billionaires are the grasshoppers. They are 100% the group that is keeping the rest of us down, while blaming marginalized groups like immigrants or trans folks or what have you, in an attempt to distract us from focusing on what really matters. In addition to supporting collective bargaining rights and the increased rates of union membership or association membership, and voting for candidates that are willing to push working class values, I would argue that we need to begin reforming our government and our economy around a new understanding of the reality we find ourselves in. Meaning we need to democratize the workplace, more worker co-ops, more voting for like executive leadership, for example, or at least members that are on the board and represent workers, more equal representation and fair representation in Congress and the political system as a whole, term limits on senators and congressmen and Supreme Court and general federal court judge positions, right? We need to limit power and spread it out even more. I think the executive branch needs to, the presidency specifically, should be split up into several different positions, kind of like Switzerland, wherein they have either like 3 or 5 executives that kind of swap out the presidency every year, I believe. And then in the meantime, they're like in lesser roles, almost like vice presidents. And then that council just kind of keeps rotating. I think we should have something like that, like a council of executives that are probably best appointed by Congress. Honestly, we should probably it'd be best more than likely if we just got rid of the Senate, gave those powers to the House, and then expanded it out so that the House had a representative for every, like, let's say 500,000 people in the United States. It would grow it substantially and would resist consolidation of power that you often see in the United States today. That said, there would still be times when you need the ability to make quick decisions and decisive decisions, and sometimes even violent ones, especially if, say, our nation were attacked. And in those situations, I think committees and stronger rules around their automatic but limited emergency powers given to those on the executive board or council, I think should be expected, but they should be very, very specific and timed, and the expiration of which should be automatic. I think we should retool our Constitution to create a much more automated system, if you will, in regards to what's required and then consequences for it. For example, if one does not divest their assets and their estate and put it in a blind trust, they should not be able to ascend to the presidency. You shouldn't be able to do what Donald Trump did, right? And much like how our elections are automatic and take place every 2 years, whether the president likes it or not, I think things like passing a budget and passing a balanced budget and taking care of the American people and funding social welfare programs and so on should all be automatic. And the ability to mess with or destabilize any number of these important core functions of the American Republic should be taken away from any given executive or even specific Congress. Their ability to control and manipulate, right? It should be removed from them, and they go about doing the American people's will as opposed to being able to determine what it is for themselves, because that's created a lot of problems for us. I think many public services should be taken out of the hands of the government entirely and made automatic so that they are to fulfill that role and make sure those things are met, but they don't get to determine or change whether or not they exist or how well funded they are. At most, Congress can influence it in small degrees over time. Additionally, I think we should have universal services such as healthcare and housing and government guaranteed food and water services, and either nonprofits or nationalized like energy and telecom services and so on. I believe a fourth branch of the government that is effectively a watchdog for the other three should be implemented, that really enforces campaign finance and ethics rules and so on, and is effectively an enforcement arm for the judicial branch in particular, that keeps the executive branch in check, but also makes sure that there is autonomy in the function of the nation and the republic, and the transparency that is enforced on our government. And finally, at least for now, I think that we should have voter referendums, kind of like we do at a state level and like where I grew up in California. I think the fact that we only have the presidency as the main outlet for expressing public frustration with the political system, so we vote basically out of anger or out of frustration with where we're at, and we want change, and it is a very blunt instrument. So I think we need to rein that in and turn that cudgel into a scalpel and allow the United States citizens to actually vote on specific concepts, at least, that are not written by companies or lobbyists or what have you, that stop the ability for the government to, regulate given industries like Uber or like AI has been trying to do, those companies, but instead do things like the temperature of the American people. Like, this is what we're focusing on now. This is what we're concerned about. Like, let's say immigration. Like, we're concerned about immigration, and we want to see deportations of some of the more violent criminals, but also a more streamlined process for achieving citizenship and what that looks like. Or perhaps tweaking elements of how the Second Amendment is interpreted so that it is understood that universal background checks and training with a firearm and so on before you're able to use it, especially if you're going to be carrying it in public, would be expected. I think these sorts of things would be good. So it allows for kind of common sense things that are like 80-20 or 90-10 issues that the American people support. It allows them to effectively compel Congress to deal with these issues and let them know this is what we're wanting, without putting it in lobbyists or just lawmakers' hands in and of themselves. It gives a clear roadmap and shows where the American people want this to go. And if we can tighten that up without allowing corporations and lobbying special interests and so on that would work against the interests of the American people from kind of taking that over and corrupting it, I think that would be a great system to implement. So overall, we need to rein big business and big government back in and make sure that both of them increasingly work in the interests of the American people at large. I think we need to create a system of universal services, guarantee collective bargaining rights in industries throughout the United States, and implement reforms that allow us to better control, hold accountable, and steer our own government in ways that diversifies power so it doesn't consolidate in the hands of a few or in the hands of strong men. Anyway, that's all I have for you today. Feel free to comment below what kind of ideas or changes you might like to see in the American political or economic system. Otherwise, stick around. We'll definitely be talking more about it.